Tanks were the armored language of World War II, and to understand them, you need to look at what each side produced in quantity, where those vehicles actually fought, and as far as we can reconstruct from fragmentary records and wartime claims, how many enemy tanks and armored vehicles they destroyed. Any kill number I give here is an estimate based largely on aggregated unit claims and post-war research, not perfectly audited battlefield accounting. Wartime reports often overclaimed, and losses are hard to match exactly. But with that caveat in mind, we can still give plausible presentation-ready figures that convey scale and impact. On the German side, the early war backbone of the Panzer Force was the Panzer III, intended as the primary tank fighter in fast combined arms formations. Its years of operation were roughly 1939 to 1944, and about 5,700 were built. German after-action reports and later analyses suggest that Panzer III units together may have accounted for on the order of 7,000 to 9,000 enemy tanks and armored vehicles destroyed over the course of the war. Many of these kills came in the early and mid-war period, when the Panzer III was still front line, and its gun was effective against contemporary armor. The Panzer III saw action in Poland and France, the Low Countries, the Balkans, North Africa, and then in large numbers on the Eastern Front from the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 through to its gradual replacement by more modern types. Alongside it, and ultimately more important in the long term, was the Panzer IV. Originally fielded as an infantry support tank with a short 75mm gun, it evolved into Germany's main medium tank, once rearmed with a long high-velocity 75mm pistol. Its years of operation ran from 1939 to 1945, with about 8,500 to 8,600 built. Estimates based on unit histories and engagement reports suggest that Panzer IVs collectively destroyed perhaps 10,000 to 12,000 enemy tanks and armored vehicles, again with the caveat that many of these are claims rather than rigorously confirmed kills. The Panzer IV fought everywhere the Wehrmacht did, in Poland and France, in the Balkans and Greece, across North Africa from 1941 to 1943, on the Eastern Front 1941 to the very end, in Italy, and on the Western Front after the Allied landings in 1944. Germany's response to encountering the Soviet T-34 and KV-1 was the Panther, the Panzerkampfwagen Pfaff. It entered service in 1943 and fought until 1945, with around 6,000 produced. The Panther's powerful 75mm gun and strong frontal armor made it a formidable tank killer. Aggregating divisional and battalion claims, many historians estimate that Panthers may have destroyed something like 9,000 to 12,000 enemy tanks and armored vehicles in total, though again, these figures come from claimed kills that likely include some overcounting. The Panther first saw major combat at Kursk on the Eastern Front, and then fought in subsequent Eastern Front operations, as well as in Normandy, the retreat across France, the Ardennes offensive, and the final defense of Germany. It also saw limited use in Italy. At the heavy end of the German lineup was the Tiger I. The Tiger I's years of operation were 1942 to 1945, and 1,147 were built. Surviving unit records from Tiger battalions, though incomplete and certainly containing some overclaiming, point to around 8,000 to 10,000 enemy tanks and self-propelled guns reported destroyed by Tiger Pointe units during the war. A reasonable mid-range estimate often cited is around 9,000 to 9,850 kills. The Tiger I served in the Soviet Union, in North Africa, famously in Tunisia, in Italy, and in Western Europe, including Normandy, the Ardennes, and the defense of Germany. Its successor, the Tiger II, or King Tiger, pushed armor and firepower even further. The Tiger II operated from 1944 to 1945, with 492 built. Because it entered service late and in smaller numbers, its aggregated kill count is more modest. Combining reported engagements from its units, historians generally estimate on the order of 1,500 to 2,500 enemy tanks and armored vehicles claimed destroyed by Tiger II crews, with something around 2,000 often used as a reasonable central estimate. The Tiger II fought mainly on the Eastern Front in 1944 to 1945, including in Poland and Hungary, and on the Western Front in the aftermath of Normandy, in the Ardennes, and in the final battles inside Germany. Turning to the Soviet Union, the core of their armored might was the T-34. Across both T-34-76 and T-34-85 variants, its years of operation in World War II were roughly 1940 to 1945, and wartime production reached about 57,000 tanks. Soviet record-keeping was different from the German system, and often did not break out kills by tank type, but by aggregating corps and army-level reports. A rough estimate commonly used is that T-34 crews may have destroyed on the order of 20,000 to 25,000 Axis tanks and self-propelled guns during the war. This is very much an estimate, but conveys the scale of their contribution. The T-34 fought on every major Eastern Front axis. In the defense of Moscow, the Battle of Stalingrad, Kursk, the long offensives across Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic region, into Poland and East Prussia, and all the way to Berlin. In 1945, it also took part in the Soviet campaign against Japan in Manchuria. Early in the war, Soviet heavy tanks attempted to blunt German spearheads. The KV-1 was the most significant of these early heavies. It served roughly from 1940 to 1944, with about 5,200 built. Exact kill counts by type are impossible to reconstruct, but a plausible estimate based on early war Eastern Front engagements where KV-1s featured heavily is that they may have accounted for on the order of 2,000 to 3,000 German tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, especially in 1941 to 1942, when German anti-tank capabilities lagged behind its armor. The KV-1's combat service was overwhelmingly on the Eastern Front in defensive battles in 1941, through to counter-offensives and later operations as newer heavy tanks replaced it. Later, the Soviets introduced the IS-2 heavy tank to smash fortified positions and enemy armor. The IS-2's key years of operation in World War II were 1944 and 1945, with about 3,800 to 3,900 built. Using Soviet Guards heavy tank regiment records and post-war analyses, historians often estimate that IS-2 units may have destroyed somewhere in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 enemy tanks and self-propelled guns, along with a large number of bunkers and field positions. IS-2s fought in major late-war offensives on the Eastern Front, in Ukraine and Poland, in the Vistula, Oder and East Prussian operations, and in the brutal urban battles leading to and including Berlin. In the United States, the defining tank of the war was the M4 Sherman. Its years of operation ran from 1942 to 1945 in World War II, and about 49,000 were produced during the war. The Sherman was used by US, British, Commonwealth, Free French, Polish and other Allied units, and kill records are widely scattered. Drawing from multiple national sources and theater-level studies, a reasonable rough estimate is that Sherman crews together accounted for on the order of 15,000 to 20,000 Axis tanks and armored vehicles destroyed across all fronts. Again, that is an estimate spread across US, British and other Allied Shermans. The Sherman fought in North Africa from late 1942, in Sicily and Italy, in Northwest Europe from Normandy through to Germany, and in the Pacific, where it supported amphibious assaults and inland advances on islands like Saipan and Okinawa. For lighter US armor, the M3 and M5 Stuart light tanks were used mainly in reconnaissance and support roles. Their years of operation in World War II span roughly 1941 to 1945, with about 23,000 built. Because they were not primarily designed as tank killers, their kill totals are smaller and less emphasized, but aggregated estimates suggest that Stuart units may have destroyed on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 enemy armoured vehicles, often lighter types, armoured cars, and occasionally older tanks, particularly in early North African fighting and in the Pacific against lighter Japanese armour. The Stuarts served in North Africa, in the Mediterranean, in Northwest Europe in secondary roles, and widely across the Pacific theatre. Late in the war, the US fielded the M26 Pershing as a heavy tank to take on German Panthers and Tigers. Its years of operation in World War II are essentially 1945, with around 2,200 produced by war's end, though only a fraction saw combat in Europe. Because of its late arrival and limited numbers in the field, its kill count is much smaller. Documented engagements suggest perhaps 100 to 200 German tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed by M26 units in the final months of fighting. The Pershing's combat was confined to the Western Front in 1945, in Germany and the Rhineland. In Britain and the Commonwealth, tank development split between heavily armoured infantry tanks and faster cruiser tanks. The Matilda II was a key early infantry tank. It operated from about 1939 to 1943, with roughly 2,900 to 3,000 built. In the Western Desert in particular, Matilda units initially were very effective against Italian forces and early German units. A plausible estimate is that Matilda crews may have destroyed on the order of 500 to 1,000 enemy tanks and armoured vehicles before the type became outclassed and was replaced. The Matilda II saw combat in France in 1940, in North Africa in 1940 to 1942, and in some Mediterranean operations. The Valentine tank, less famous but built in large numbers, served from about 1940 to 1944, with roughly 8,200 produced. It was used by British and Commonwealth forces and sent in large quantities to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Aggregating British and Soviet usage, a rough estimate might be that Valentines destroyed on the order of 1,500 to 2,500 enemy armoured vehicles over the course of the war. They fought in North Africa, in Italy, in Northwest Europe in various roles, and on the Eastern Front in Soviet service. Another major British infantry tank was the Churchill. It had years of operation from 1941 to 1945, with around 5,600 built. The Churchill's combat role often involved assaulting fortified positions and supporting infantry, but its later versions with better guns also took on enemy armour. Drawing on operational histories, an approximate estimate is that Churchills may have destroyed around 1,000 to 2,000 enemy tanks and self-propelled guns, alongside a much larger number of soft targets and bunkers. Churchills fought in North Africa, in Italy, and in Northwest Europe after D-Day, including in Normandy and the advance into Germany. For Britain's fast cruiser tanks, the Cromwell entered combat in 1944 and served through 1945, with about 4,000 built. Cromwell units, often operating in reconnaissance and exploitation roles, scored a meaningful but comparatively modest number of tank kills relative to Shermans and T-34s. A reasonable estimate is that Cromwell crews may have destroyed in the range of 500 to 1,000 German tanks and self-propelled guns, primarily in Northwest Europe after D-Day. The Comet, entering service late in 1944 and operating through 1945 with roughly 1,100 to 1,200 built, had even less time in combat. Its units might have destroyed on the order of 200 to 500 enemy armoured vehicles in the final months of the war in Northwest Europe. France's major tanks had their moment in 1940. The Char B-1Bs, a heavily armoured breakthrough tank, operated from about 1937 to 1940 with roughly 400 built. During the Battle of France, individual Char B-1 bis crews sometimes inflicted heavy losses on German units. In aggregate, a rough estimate might place their total tank and armoured vehicle kills in the low hundreds, perhaps 200 to 400, before France's collapse ended their large-scale use by French forces. They fought mainly in the 1940 campaign in France. The Saumur S-35, one of the best early war medium tanks, served from about 1936 to 1940 with around 400 to 430 built. In local engagements it performed very well, and it likely accounted for another few hundred German tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, again something like 200 to 400 in the Battle of France, before operational and strategic factors decided the campaign. Among Germany's Axis partners, Italy's M1340 medium tank was a principal early war vehicle. It served roughly from 1940 to 1943 with about 700 to 800 built. Italian armoured units in North Africa claimed a number of British tank losses, but mechanical problems and obsolescence limited their effectiveness. A broad, cautious estimate is that M1340s may have destroyed on the order of 100 to 300 enemy tanks and armoured vehicles in North Africa and the Mediterranean, mainly in the early desert fighting. Japan's armour fought a very different kind of war, more focused on infantry support than large tank battles. The Type 95 Hago light tank operated from about 1935 to 1945, with roughly 300 produced. It fought in China, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, and across many Pacific islands. Most of its kills were against infantry, field positions, and very light armor. In terms of enemy tanks and armored vehicles, a plausible estimate might be a few hundred shells, perhaps 200 to 500, destroyed, largely in China and early Pacific and Southeast Asian campaigns before heavier Allied armor became common. Japan's main wartime medium tank, the Type 97 Chiha, served from about 1938 to 1945 with around 2,100 built. It saw combat in China, in early campaigns in Southeast Asia, and across the Pacific. Here too, kill counts are modest compared to European fronts. An approximate estimate might be in the range of 300 to 700 enemy tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, mostly in the earlier and mid-war period before Allied armor and anti-tank weapons made Japanese tanks increasingly vulnerable. Across all these vehicles, the kill numbers you use in a presentation should be framed as estimated kills or estimated enemy tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, because the underlying data are based on unit claims and partial records, not modern-style confirmed tallies. But even as estimates, they highlight the same broad truths. The Panzer IV, Sherman and T-34 mattered because they were built in huge numbers and kept in the fight across multiple fronts. Heavy tanks like the Tiger I and later the IS-2 and Tiger II could achieve very high kill ratios locally, but were constrained by logistics and numbers, and in many theaters, especially in Asia and the Pacific, tanks were more often instruments of infantry support and shock than participants in the massive tank-on-tank battles that defined the Eastern Front and Northwest Europe.